Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The afternoon sun bathed the Willow Avenue neighborhood in a golden glow, giving the illusion of peaceful tranquility. Children played on the sidewalks, neighbors chatted on their porches, and traffic was light. For many, it was just an ordinary day. Carolina walked slowly toward her car, a handbag carefully placed over her shoulder. A strong, calm, and respected woman in her neighborhood, she had learned to navigate a world where stairs could sometimes be judgmental. But today, she had no idea that a simple outing would turn into a nightmare. Officer Ramon Martinez, a young police officer known for his arrogance and impulsiveness, was patrolling the area. Always on the lookout for what he perceived as infractions, he spotted Carolina and decided, for no real reason, to arrest her. His decision was quick, cold, almost mechanical, and he had no idea who she was. She was the mother of his superior, Captain Ramirez, an officer respected for his integrity and his commitment to fighting the abuse of power. What began as an ordinary day would soon turn into an incident that would change not only Carolina's life, but also the lives of everyone watching that day. A slap, a shocked silence, and the truth still invisible behind a simple uniform. It was the beginning of a lesson in dignity, power, and justice, where authority seemed uncontrollable. The neighborhood was bustling, but there was a palpable tension in the air. Hurried passers-by glanced furtively at the patrolling police officers, as if everyone knew the calm could disappear in an instant. Carolina walked calmly toward her car, parked in front of the building where she lived. Her purse rested on her shoulder, and her gaze remained focused on the sidewalk, avoiding any unnecessary conflict. Suddenly, a faint siren sounded behind her. Officer Ramon Martinez emerged from his patrol car, his face contorted with irritation he made no attempt to hide. "Hello, madam. May I see your papers?" he asked curtly. Carolina looked up, surprised but calm. "Of course, officer. May I ask why?" Martinez frowned, as if this question were an offense. "Just a routine check." "You were walking, strangely." Carolina, keeping her calm, replied. "I was just walking to my car. I didn't break any rules." But Carolina's words had no effect on Martinez. His patience was already gone. He placed his hand on Carolina's arm to stop her, ignoring the surprise and fear in her eyes. "You're not cooperating fast enough," he exclaimed. Passers-by began to gather, some taking out their phones, sensing that the situation was about to escalate. Then, in an impulsive and brutal gesture, Martinez raised his hand and slapped Carolina across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the street, causing some witnesses to recoil. Carolina stood frozen for a moment, in shock, but her expression remained dignified, far from panic or anger. You're touching me for nothing," she whispered, her voice calm but firm, as the crowd began to murmur among themselves, shocked by the gratuitous violence. Martinez, satisfied with his apparent authority, did not know that the woman he had just slapped was none other than the mother of his direct superior, Captain Ramirez. Completely unaware of the irony of fate, he believed he had the situation under control. But he was far from suspecting that this simple check would soon turn into a lesson in humility and justice. The slap echoed through the street again, and an awkward silence fell over the passers-by. Some whispered among themselves, others took out their phones to record the scene. Carolina, her eyes fixed on Martinez, didn't move. She knew that giving in to anger would only make the situation worse. "Enough," she said in a firm but calm voice. "I haven't broken any laws. You have no reason to touch me." Martinez, annoyed by his apparent calm, did not take his words into account. "You're not listening to me. You're under arrest," he shouted, moving closer to handcuff her. Carolina raised her hands slightly, showing no physical resistance, but her gaze was piercing. "Are you sure you want to do this in front of all these witnesses?" she asked calmly, a hint of defiance in her voice. But Martinez wouldn't listen. He handcuffed him with an air of superiority, ignoring the shocked looks of passers-by. Some were beginning to intervene. "Hey! Leave her alone, a young man shouted from the sidewalk. You can't just hit someone like that, added a woman who was filming the scene. Martinez, increasingly irritated by the attention he was attracting, shook his head. Back off, this is a police matter, he yelled. Then an authoritative voice was heard from the end of the street. Ramon. Stop immediately. Martinez froze. He knew that voice. Captain Ramirez appeared a few meters away, his face calm but grave. The crowd immediately sensed a change in the air, the tension rose a notch. Ramirez slowly approached his subordinate. What's going on here? He asked, his voice sharp but controlled. Martinez, panicked, tried to justify his actions. Captain, she wasn't cooperating. Ramirez knelt slightly to speak to his mother, signaling her to remain calm. Carolina, despite the humiliation and pain of the slap, bowed her head slightly and replied. I'm fine, son. I didn't do anything wrong. The crowd held its breath. The entire neighborhood seemed suddenly suspended in the air. Ramirez then turned his gaze to Martinez, the silence already imposing its authority. Ramon, you hit an innocent citizen. And you didn't even know who she was. His voice was calm, but each word carried a heavy weight. Martinez swallowed, realizing too late the monumental mistake he had just made. The street, usually so bustling, suddenly seemed suspended in time. Passers-by stood motionless, watching the scene with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Carolina, handcuffed, remained calm, her dark eyes fixed on Martinez's face without a hint of fear. The officer's every movement seemed clumsy, disordered, as the crowd began to murmur and film with their phones. Ramirez slowly approached his mother, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder to reassure her. Mom, stay calm. Carolina nodded slightly, her face impassive. She knew that anger or panic would only make the situation worse and prove Martinez right. Martinez, still nervous, shifted from one foot to the other, his hands clenched on the handcuffs. Captain. I didn't mean to. He stammered, trying to justify his actions, but each word seemed less convincing than the last. Ramirez, still calm but authoritative, fixed his gaze on his subordinate. You hit an innocent woman in the street. And you didn't even know she was my mother. Do you realize the magnitude of your mistake? Martinez looked away, unable to bear the gravity of the reproach. The tension rose further when the crowd began to murmur phrases like, "You are crazy to do this. This woman did nothing." Carolina, despite the slap still burning on her cheek, remained dignified. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice calm but firm. Agent Martinez, what you just did is unacceptable. You are abusing your authority. You will have to answer for your actions. The crowd held their breath, admiring Carolina's quiet strength. Each word resonated with unexpected power. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't pleading, she was simply speaking the truth. Ramirez placed a hand on Martinez's shoulder to gently but firmly steady him. Leave her alone. You're suspended, Ramon. And believe me, this suspension is just the beginning of the consequences. Martinez, flushed with shame and anger, stepped back, unable to respond. His pride as a police officer had just crumbled in front of his own mother and the entire community. Carolina, finally freed from the handcuffs by Ramirez, remained standing, straight and imposing despite everything. She took a deep breath, feeling her anger transform into quiet strength. The lesson was being taught, but not only to Martinez. The entire street, passers-by and witnesses now understood that dignity and justice could not be ignored. As the crowd held its breath, Ramirez led his mother a little to one side, shielding her from Martinez's aggressive gaze and curious whispers. Intrigued passers-by continued to film, some whispering among themselves, "Who is this woman?" Martinez, meanwhile, stood frozen, his face pale and his eyes wide. He was only just beginning to understand that his impulsive act would not go unpunished. The tension was palpable, every word Ramirez said hung heavy in the air. Ramon, Ramirez said, his voice low but penetrating, "You just hit someone you know very well, except you didn't know it." Martinez blinked in confusion. What? He stammered. Ramirez continued, calmly, but with unquestionable authority. "That woman, she's my mother. Carolina Ramirez. The one you slapped, humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood, she's Captain Ramirez's mother." A deafening silence followed. The crowd froze, some letting out shocked murmurs. Martinez felt his heart race. Panic replaced his arrogance. Everything he had thought he had control of had slipped away in an instant. Carolina, despite the pain and humiliation, remained upright and impassive. She met her son's gaze, a slight, reassuring smile on her lips. "I told you to stay calm," she whispered, not angry, only with unwavering dignity. Martinez, unable to find his words, instinctively stepped back. Every gesture seemed clumsy, his authority completely shattered. Bystanders now realized that the arrogant officer had not only abused his power, but had also made a fool of himself in front of his own superiors. Ramirez, implacable but still calm, placed a hand on his subordinate's shoulder. "You will answer for your actions, Ramon. And believe me, this lesson will remain etched in your memory." The revealed truth made Martinez's mask fall. He was no more than an impulsive young police officer, confronted with justice embodied by his own hierarchy and by Carolina's imperturbable dignity. The scene ended with this palpable tension: a respected mother, a determined son and a humiliated officer, while the entire community realized that no one could ignore justice, especially not those who believed themselves above others. The crowd began to murmur louder and louder, some almost silently applauding Carolina's dignity. Ramirez stepped forward, immediately asserting his authority. Each step seemed to sound like a warning to Martinez. The situation was no longer under his control. "Ramon, back off." The captain's voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of judgment. "You don't touch that woman again. Not today, not ever." Martinez, his hands trembling, stammered. Captain, I thought." "What did you think?" Ramirez interrupted. "That you could humiliate an innocent citizen and no one would notice?" Carolina, standing next to her son, crossed her arms and looked at the young agent with imposing calm. "You have abused your power. You must understand that gratuitous violence is never a solution." Ramirez nodded silently to his mother. Then he turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this woman has committed no offense. Everything you have just witnessed is unacceptable. I apologize for this incident on behalf of the police, and I assure you that action will be taken." The crowd, reassured by this intervention, murmured words of support. Some tried to calm the tension, others continued to film, aware that this moment would remain etched in their memory. Martinez looked down, feeling the weight of shame and fear sinking down on him. Ramirez stepped closer and, in a cold but controlled tone, announced, "You are suspended until further notice. An internal investigation will determine what happens next. And believe me, this slap in the face will have consequences." Carolina placed a hand on her son's shoulder, feeling pride mixed with worry. She knew the situation had been humiliating, but with Ramirez's intervention, justice would be served. "Thank you, son," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude and serenity. "But let me finish showing this neighborhood what it means to remain dignified in the face of injustice." Ramirez smiled slightly and stepped back, leaving his mother to address the community. Passers-by, impressed by his dignity, began to approach to offer their support. The incident had drawn their attention to a universal truth: quiet strength and justice always triumph in the end. Martinez, for his part, remained frozen, realizing that his impulsive actions had just placed him at the center of a public and professional humiliation. He had just discovered that, sometimes, authority turns against those who abuse it. Later that day, after the crowd had dispersed and the street had returned to relative calm, Ramirez led Martinez into a brigade meeting room. The door slammed shut behind them, a symbol that the situation was now strictly professional and that impunity no longer had any place. Ramirez, standing behind his desk, crossed his arms and stared at his subordinate. "Ramon, explain to me exactly what you were thinking when you slapped my mother in front of the whole neighborhood." His voice was cold, measured, each word a weight on the young policeman's conscience. Martinez looked down, unable to meet the captain's gaze. I just wanted to show that I had the situation under control, sir. I thought she wasn't cooperating," he stammered. Ramirez slowly shook his head. You thought violence and humiliation could be a way to control an innocent citizen? Ramon, what you did was not only immoral, but illegal. And you just learned it in the most humiliating way." Martinez shuddered, feeling the weight of the consequences. "Captain. I'm sorry. I didn't think." "Sorry isn't enough," Ramirez replied. "You're suspended, an internal investigation is underway, and your actions will be reviewed. You've seriously tarnished our unit's reputation, and most importantly, you've humiliated my mother." Martinez bowed his head in shame, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. Every word Ramirez said weighed on him like a sentence, every silence charged with authority echoing in his mind. Ramirez continued, his voice cold but firm. "You will have to reflect on your actions, Ramon. And you will learn that authority is not a power to be used to humiliate or intimidate. It is a responsibility. Understand?" Martinez nodded slowly, unable to speak. His arrogance had crumbled, replaced by a mixture of fear and respect for the justice embodied by his superior and the dignity of his mother. Ramirez finally placed his hand on the young man's shoulder, not to protect him, but to remind him that every choice has consequences. "You've learned your lesson," he concluded. "Never repeat it." Outside, Carolina waited patiently. She knew Ramirez would handle the situation with integrity. Her composure and dignity remained intact, and she understood that this confrontation was not just for her, but to remind the entire community that injustice would never go unpunished. A few hours after the incident, videos of the arrest and the slap began circulating on social media. The shocked faces of passers-by and Carolina's imposing calm captivated the attention of the entire city. Messages of support poured in, and the local community began to organize to show its solidarity. In the neighborhood, neighbors and friends came to Carolina's doors to offer their help and support. Some brought flowers, others simply words of comfort. "Ms. Ramirez, we saw what happened. You are an inspiration to us all. Never give up. We're behind you." Carolina, despite the fatigue and the pain of the slap, greeted everyone with a calm and sincere smile. "Thank you all," she said softly. "This isn't just for me. It's so everyone understands that you should never accept injustice, even on the street in front of everyone." Meanwhile, tensions within the squad were rising. The police hierarchy, alerted by the rapid dissemination of the video, began investigating the incident. Journalists contacted Ramirez for details, and media pressure became immediate. Passers-by who had witnessed the scene spontaneously gathered around Carolina and Ramirez, some chanting phrases of support. "Justice for Mrs. Ramirez. You don't hit an innocent woman." Martinez, isolated and humiliated, understood that the public humiliation was only getting worse. Every camera, every phone pointed at him, every accusing look reinforced the weight of his mistakes. Ramirez, watching the scene, placed a reassuring hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom," he said softly, "look at all this support. Truth and dignity always triumph." Carolina nodded, her eyes shining with pride but calm. "Yes, son. But never forget that true strength lies in calm and patience. Injustice is better fought with one's head held high than with anger." The community had made its choice, it stood with Carolina, and the impact of the incident reached far beyond Willow Street. Martinez's slap was not just an act of violence, it was the beginning of a silent but powerful movement, reminding everyone that no one, not even a police officer, was above justice and human dignity. The next morning, Martinez reported to the police station, head bowed and gaze shifty. He knew his suspension was only the beginning of the repercussions for his actions. Ramirez was waiting for him in his office, calm but firm, accompanied by two officers overseeing the internal investigation. Ramon Ramirez began, his voice sharp but controlled. The investigation has begun. Every witness will be heard, every video will be examined. Martinez felt a lump form in his throat. Captain. I understand. He stammered. Understanding doesn't erase what you did, Ramirez replied. You abused your power. And now you're going to have to answer for your actions before the hierarchy and the community. Meanwhile, Carolina, in contact with community leaders and local associations, was beginning to see the impact of the video's release. Several messages were arriving, offering her legal and media support so that Martinez could not escape his responsibilities. A reporter knocked on the door and asked to speak to Ramirez. The captain politely declined but affirmed that justice would be done. The incident began to spread around town, and Martinez realized that his career, his reputation, and even his professional life were now in danger. At the end of the day, Ramirez called Martinez into the office one last time. You are suspended until further notice, and a psychological evaluation will be required before your return. You have betrayed the trust we placed in you. Martinez, humiliated, could only nod his head. He understood that this was no longer just a lesson about hierarchy or the law, it was a lesson about respect and dignity. Carolina, for her part, knew that justice wasn't limited to Martinez's punishment. She could already see the positive effect on the neighborhood. The community felt more united, ready to defend its rights and never tolerate injustice. She took a deep breath, proud but still humble. Dignity and respect always triumph, she whispered. And as night fell over the neighborhood, a sense of impending justice and quiet pride settled in, announcing that misused authority would never go unpunished. A few days after the incident, the neighborhood was abuzz. Videos of Carolina's arrest were still circulating, but this time they were accompanied by admiring comments and messages of support. The woman who had been humiliated by an arrogant police officer had become a symbol of strength and resilience. Carolina left her house, walking with the same confidence as before, but this time under the admiring gaze of her neighbors. People stopped to smile at her, shake her hand, or simply say a few words of appreciation. Ms. Ramirez, you are amazing. Your calmness inspired the whole neighborhood. Ramirez, still at his side, watched the scene with pride. Mom, look at this, he whispered. You've changed the perception of the whole neighborhood by staying dignified and strong. Carolina nodded, a small smile lighting up her face. Son, true strength lies in calmness and patience. Injustice is better fought with dignity than with anger. Meanwhile, Martinez remained in shock. His suspension and the media coverage of his behavior placed him at the center of a professional and personal disgrace. Every comment on social media reminded him that his actions had consequences and that misused authority always turns against those who abuse it. The community, for its part, spontaneously rallied around Carolina to organize meetings and discussions on respect, justice, and citizen rights. The incident had awakened a collective conscience. No one, not even a police officer, could humiliate someone with impunity. Carolina, standing in front of her neighbors at a small impromptu gathering, said a few words that would make an impression. What happened could have broken me, but I choose to stay strong. I choose to show that dignity and respect are more powerful than fear and humiliation. The applause was long and heartfelt. The woman who had been beaten in the street was no longer a victim, she was a living example of resilience and courage. That day, the neighborhood understood that justice and dignity depend not only on laws, but also on inner strength and community support. And Carolina, hand in hand with her son, was living proof of this. In the following days, the brigade completed its internal investigation. The evidence was irrefutable. Martinez's slap had been recorded by several bystanders and surveillance cameras. His suspension was upheld, and a severe disciplinary sanction was imposed. The police hierarchy publicly stated that such abuses of power would never be tolerated. Martinez, humiliated and disarmed, found himself isolated. Every colleague, every citizen who had witnessed or followed the incident, now knew his fault. The lesson he had tried to impose through violence had backfired, and he finally understood that authority was not a privilege but a responsibility. For Carolina, the victory wasn't just personal. The community had seen her strength, calm, and dignity. Neighbors and passers-by continued to show their support, and local organizations offered to work with her to promote respect and justice in the neighborhood. Ramirez, still protective but proud, placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "You showed everyone what it means to be worthy and righteous, Mom." Carolina smiled softly. "And you, son, have shown that true authority comes from respect, not fear." Willow Street, once marked by tension and fear, became a symbol of justice and community. Children played freely, neighbors spoke to each other with greater confidence, and everyone knew that human dignity could never be ignored. As for Martinez, he left the brigade a few weeks later, forever changed by the experience. The lesson he had learned about respect and responsibility would remain etched in his memory. Carolina, standing in the middle of her community, looked up at the sky. The slap had tried to humiliate her, but it had made her stronger. And in that neighborhood, for all who had witnessed it, justice had triumphed, reminding us that true power always lies in calm, dignity, and the courage to stand up to injustice.